So I'm excited to show you guys around the workbench today. A couple things I wanted to talk about beforehand. There's no sponsorship going on this channel. Everything you see here has been purchased by me personally. Just kind of made choices and decisions on what I thought I would like. Most of it's pretty high-end stuff. I wanted to showcase a couple products. Obviously this bench is showcasing Milwaukee. You see the workbench behind me. I previously did that DeWalt bench. But, you know, I had watched a lot of YouTube videos about Milwaukee and kind of just seeing the product line. So I wanted to kind of explore it and see what was out there. I know their battery platform is super solid, legit, and I just wanted to experience it. And there's a couple reasons I went electric, or sorry, not electric, but battery operated on this bench. We'll get into that later when we're talking about power. So another one of the main reasons for even approaching a project like this is, you know, my garage is mostly automotive focused. Not a fan of dust. Woodworking is kind of a hobby of mine, but I don't have the space in here, even though I have quite a bit of space, I don't have the space to truly dedicate to a woodworking shop. So part of what I like to do is build all of my stuff into a table like this. It does a couple things. One, keeps it all consolidated so it's nice and I can move it around my shop. Two, I can roll it outside if the weather's nice and work outside, which is amazing. And three, you have very rapid access to start projects. So a couple years back before I built that bench, when I was doing general woodworking stuff or house maintenance stuff, you have your miter saw on a stand that can move around. You have your table saw. If it's a job site saw, maybe it's got its own stand. You're always having to set up and tear down. One of the things I didn't like was having to set up everything to be able to use it. So getting out your tools was a massive hassle. With this, you can roll it out. This morning I set it up. It took me 3 minutes. I did a little time lapse, but getting it from where it is to here, putting up all the flip ups, plugging it in, getting it ready to work took me exactly 3 minutes. Setting up the same functionality that this has with a bunch of independent stuff all the time would be hassle. So that's kind of the reason I like these all-in-one stations. There's a ton of them out there. I think it's just a matter of choosing one that works for what you do the best, and hopefully this is one that is up there in your consideration. For home improvement projects, I'd say the miter saw is my most used tool. Baseboards, crown molding recently, just general projects, I'm always using the saw. And generally I'm doing things that need to be fairly precise. So having the saw fixed to the bench, having some kind of track system fixed to the bench as well is gonna make, you know, future projects for me that much nicer. Previous bench had a track as well. However, the length of it was, I think, limited to just over 4 feet or something. With this setup, I have a full 8 feet of track to the left and then another 6 feet to the right. So I can pretty much nail any cut I want to high accuracy without needing to use a tape measure and make a mark or whatever. Some of the nice things, it's pretty challenging to get, or at least there's no off-the-shelf setup that I could find where you could do an inlaid track that you could put the tape measure on, as well as have support for the end of your piece kind of acting as a fence. So you know, there's a lot of systems where you could have a stop block that'll give you the stop, but nothing to keep you in and out supported for making sure you were square with your fence. So I was playing around with this one day, and I happened to be working with some of the clamping squares, and I figured out that this would actually be the perfect solution for being able to not only capture the length dimension, but also give yourself a backstop to hold a board in and, you know, in line with your fence. So what I did was position the track in the perfect to the 32nd location of where the face of this clamping square would be lined up with the fence on the saw. And a couple things I had to do to make that happen is I got these different knobs from McMaster, because you can't have a big fatty knob here because it'll encroach on that face. So I just found these, and they're pretty nice. But one of the things is, most of the hardware for your T-tracks is 1/4 inch, and you have 3/8 inch holes on the clamping square. So what I did was found some precision bushings that are 1/4 inch ID, 3/8 inch OD, that'll make up that gap from the bolt to the clamping square. Drop those over it, and now you have a nice solid connection that isn't gonna move. One of the other nice things about this setup is I was able to not have to offset the tape measure. So the tape measure is actually set up as the true measurement from this side is the left side of the blade, that one would be the right side of the blade. So there's no offset for the little tick mark on whatever you're using. So when I'm cutting, I'm using the little inside edge of this thing to line up my perfect dimension that I want to cut, and it's simple. So as long as I can find other, you know, any stop that'll match up with that setup, I'll be able to use for future things. So one of the things I came up with was if I needed a flip stop for some reason, so if I'm cutting a lot of repetitive things and also needing to cut other things, you can use this flip stop. So you can set it at, say, 2 feet, 24 inches. Use this as your stop. Generally, if you're using a flip stop, you're not super far out there, so it's okay that it doesn't have the back gauge portion of things, because you're relying on the fence of the saw. And then it's the perfect dimension to flip up out of the way so you can use your other stop for other cuts. The saw itself, I haven't used it too terribly much yet, but from what I can tell, it's got great power. Accuracy seems very good. Very easy to change blades. It's got all the functionality, stops, depth cut, bevel and miter, everything's beautiful. The lock is extremely solid. You have plenty of, you know, lock-in adjustments, even when it's not locked but in a click spot, it's not going anywhere. You can also bypass if you don't want it to click, there's a little bypass here that'll hold the lever up, which is kind of cool. So just kind of depends on what you want. The way the bench is set up, I put it so the hole, when it's in its storage position, the whole saw is behind the front edge. I'm using the bolt holes, and it's actually bolted down to the top versus just using the screw holes. Overall, you know, it functions and works well. Like I said, I haven't used it too much to gauge the dust collection, but you know, everyone knows the dust collection on these saws is amazing. So I mentioned I wanted to maintain full functionality of the table saw. So one of the ways I've done that is actually provide a sliding rail system, precision rail for the table saw itself. It rides on those rails, and it's also powered by a linear actuator that will control the in and out, so you can actually move it in and out. So what this does is a couple things. Number one, it gives you the ability to, run your fence to the left of the table, which allows you to bring your fence in, next to the blade, full functionality. It also gives you the access you need to change your batteries. So you move it in and out, change your battery, gives you battery access. You actually have access to the riving knife handle, which is tucked underneath back there. And then you have access to the onboard kind of storage that comes with the saw as well. Linear rails, I was prepared to shell out a fortune for these. I know how much they cost. Upon doing my usual Amazon searching, I came across some products that looked fairly legitimate. I was a little suspect, but they had good reviews, so I pulled the trigger. I couldn't be more happy with this product that I found. I believe the 2 rails, 4 bearings, the pricing at the date of this video, which is early 2021, the price is right around $65 for that whole kit. The rails are a meter long, 39 inches, which is the perfect length to get the distance away we need to be able to cut the sheets. So from the blade right now to the miter saw, where I would have an interference, is 49 inches. So even if you're working with an MDF sheet that's 49 inches, you could still cut a little bit off the edge if you needed to for some reason. The actuator was a little more expensive actually than the rails. I think it was just under $100, but it comes with the switch you need and the kind of basic wiring. It's a 12-volt actuator. So what I did there was just use repurposed an old laptop power supply to convert my 120 volt AC to 12 volt DC. That was pretty simple. So part of what you need to do is make sure, obviously, your dust collection hose has enough flexibility to move with your saw. I put in segmented miter outfeed grooves so you can have your saw in various spots. So if you don't need to run it all the way out every time if you don't want to. Takes about 45 seconds to move it out and move it back in. So it's not too bad. If you're going to use it a bunch, you just move it once and then kind of roll with it. I have three basic setups. Obviously you have your fence setup where, if you're, cutting something wide, you can be way out here. And one of the nice things is your flip up for the miter saw actually acts as your outfeed for if you're way over here and working out on this side of the table. You don't really need to be unless you're trying to cross cut something super long, which you could theoretically do here. You wouldn't necessarily be out here and also, have the fence way out here. So, but you can if you need to. The other kind of setups I have are onboard miter gauge here. So if you're doing kind of quick cross cutting, you can use, I just have an Incra 27 position miter gauge that I made. I threw on some Armor Tool track here and then found a little stop block with nuts so you can kind of do, repeated cuts with a little stop block here. So one of the major improvements I wanted to make is to have a much more legitimate, robust router solution than what I had previously. Can't beat this setup by Woodpeckers. This drop-in router table and then the super fence that goes with it is just some of the nicest tools I've ever had the pleasure of working with. I use the Woodpeckers track for the miter fence as well. It's a little tricky because the miter slot isn't in the center. So you have to do a little bit of math to figure out exactly where you need to route your grooves in to lay this track in. The center to center of the super fence is 17 inches. So you just have to figure out the offsets needed for, you know, where you need to put your track. I just kind of based this off of the tables that Woodpeckers has. They show that they have the track kind of come to about the middle of the table. And then I wanted to position the plate approximately the same as where they have the front T-track on their table as well. I had space to put in kind of a cool little router specific drawer here. So I have all the different plates that drop in, obviously the keyhole. This is the freehand guide that they have. So if you're not using the fence and you're just freehanding stuff, there's a little guide. All the router bits I have, you know, stuff like different collet, and then the tools you need to operate all of this are all nicely in this drawer. I inset it into the panel just because this is kind of my control panel and I wanted to inset it instead of having this big box hanging off the side. I thought it looked better, but super nice to be working. You can always hit it with your knee to turn it off if you need to, so it's about in the right spot. All right, so I have the super fence stored kind of low on the end here, just in a spot that's kind of out of the way, kind of protected vertically from the flip up when it's in the down position, and then up off the ground so it's, you know, you can't kick it or anything like that. But just to pull it off, you just kind of loosen the connectors that hold the track in place. Be careful not to drop it. And then all you gotta do is drop it in. But the nice thing about the way this stores is you can keep your feather boards on it. You can keep your kind of dust hand guard on it if you need to use that. And then it's, you know, you have full functionality of using this thing fairly rapidly in a rapid setup. So you can go from, you know, having a complete flat work surface to being ready to route something pretty quickly. If you guys aren't familiar with this setup, Woodpeckers has a great deep dive series on the router plate as well as the fence. All right, so let's talk about the flip ups and kind of how they're designed. So I wanted to use something that would be as precise as possible to get the mechanism for the miter saw flip ups. Not too critical for the table saw or the other one we'll talk about, but especially for the miter saw where I'm relying heavily on the position laterally of this thing. So I don't want horizontal movement. And then I wanted it to be able to be repetitively in the same plane as the tabletop. And I'd always, you know, I'd known about 80-20 for a while, never really had figured out quite the application to use it for anything. But I think I finally figured this out and came up with something pretty robust. So I have their linear bearing with a lock, and then I have a kind of stop block down on there. So when this comes up into position, I'm limiting myself from going past plane by having this stop block there. It's in the perfect position. And then I'm also have some struts on here so it doesn't go crashing down. So you can simply let it go and it'll nicely controlled descent. They also provide you a little bit of assistance opening as well, so you're not bearing the full weight all the time. These are Just some inexpensive Amazon gas struts. For the table saw flip up, I went a little bit different. It's a little more simple design. We just have a basic frame attached to the bench, and then I have a basic frame underneath the flip up and have a kickstand basically that I rotate over that bears on little clip angles. So pretty easy to change the pitch. You just need to relocate the angles to kind of set it where you want it. I went with the angles that have the 2 bolts just because there's, you know, a decent amount of vertical load on this. I wanted to have a kind of repurposed outfeed, or at least multi-purpose outfeed, I guess is a better way to put it, and I figure having an assembly T-track table would be a perfect option. So this is the perfect use, in my opinion, for some of that Armor Tool T-track. This T-track is cool because it has the kind of integrated tool entry points built into it. So you have these intersection points where you can drop a tool in the center. I was able to utilize the full grid, so I have good alignment on each corner. So in addition to the kickstand way to hold up this flip up, obviously the kickstand gives us a bar across the bottom there that's not exactly friendly for servicing the vacuum or getting the dust collection bin emptied out. So what I came up with was actually a little kickstand piece that I can use that will hold not only the flip up, but also the kickstand. And now with this in position, you can, you know, empty your drum or change the filters on your vacuum or gain access to under there without having any obstructions in the way. So most of the time you're cutting lengthy materials to the left side of the blade, so you got good vision and everything. But I wanted to have the ability to cut things on the right as well if I'm in the middle of also using the table saw or whatever. It's just nice to be able to utilize both sides. With the other bench, I use the right side all the time because that's the way it was set up, so I'm kind of used to it. But this, you'll see this flip up is a lot more narrow than the other one, kind of for 2 reasons. One is we also have this other flip up here, but I also wanted to have that side be as close as possible to the back side of the table saw for outfeed support, so I made that one purposely bigger than I think it needed to be. Plus on this side, this is the side that I have my handles on for steering, and I didn't want this to be too close because as you see when this is down, you know, you didn't want this to encroach too much on your handle so you could still have a good grip on it and be able to get your hands in there. You know, when you're steering this thing and you're like this, you know, I just wanted to make sure I had plenty of space to comfortably grab the handles. The flip up with the pack out on it was kind of a different idea I had. Again, you can see down here that I have a different method of support. This one has a little U-frame that has a horizontal piece spanning 2 verticals that support it rather than doing the angles on the other side. If I had set this up on the table saw outfeed, I would have that permanent bar in the way, and that's what I was trying to avoid. That's why I went to that angle method. So why did I put a pack out plate on a flip up? Well, a couple different reasons. Obviously I have pack out bins stored throughout, so if I just wanted a hardware location or somewhere extra, you know, spot to hang something, that's an option. But something a little more creative that I came up with was actually to put the Armor Tool pocket hole jig on a pack out plate, or a kind of a piece of plywood adapted to pack out. So what you can do is attach it here find your holes, lock it in position, and now you have a spot for your pocket hole jig to work. Your dust collection auxiliary hose fits and hooks up just fine. This thing self-adjusts for thickness. The depth of drill adjusts automatically for your different thickness of wood. And then this piece over here is dialing in where your collet needs to be for your drill bit. So couldn't be happier with this thing. Also have right underneath stored is pack out with all of your different pocket hole screws. So I kind of have softwood, hardwood set up, and then all the different lengths and whatever, and then the instructions in here as well. So you have a nice hardware package, and you have your tool on it so you can store it all together nice and neat. And then flipping this thing down, the handle's offset just so, because you're always going to be off to one side when you're using the kickstand, but to put it down all you need to do is lift and set it down. But I put a handle on the side that has the kickstand as well, so grab the handle and then you don't really need that. Quick description on kind of how the vacuum plumbing is structured. So you have a main trunk line that comes out of the cyclone, runs the length of the bench down the center, kind of near the top. And that's kind of what's behind this panel here is a lot of the plumbing and electrical. But what I have is basically three pull-offs of that trunk, and I'm using these gate valves. These are like kind of a smaller version of an RV dump valve. Super easy to operate. So the three-way switch, I just picked these button switches. They're like the old school switches just because I like the way they look, but you could use a normal flip switch too. Turn the vacuum on, vacuum off. That kind of pop noise you hear is the built-in filter cleaner. It's a little disturbing if it's the first time you've heard it. So I have valve here for table saw, valve in the center that controls my hose, which, I like adding this feature of having a hose that you can reach around and clean off your workstation. And then this valve here is the valve for the router station. Now this one's a bit trickier than the others because there's actually two. This one actually gets split after the valve. I have the Woodpeckers dust box underneath here that captures kind of the downdraft dust from the router table. And then I also have the top hose here that gets plugged into the super fence as well. So you're losing a bit of airspeed, but so far, especially the downdraft part, I used this for the flip ups for the miter saw, and dust collection was actually surprisingly good. So pretty happy with that. And then there's another valve on the other side directly underneath the miter saw that controls the dust collection for the miter saw as well. The other nice thing about the cleanup hose is if you're using any other tools like your handheld palm router or sander or something, you can also use this for dust collection on those as well. I'm using a 12 gauge extension cord. I have a 620p connector here in the side, and this is where I'm able to take my extension cord and actually plug in the power that services the entire bench. So rather than having to store the cord on the bench or anything like that, I just have it here. The plug for this power strip ties into that plug, and this is what provides the power to the rest of the bench. This one's pretty unique. It's got a front and a back side. The back side, the plugs are actually spaced out along the full length, so you can get kind of bigger power adapters back there. But I have the vacuum plugged in, I have the pack out radio plugged in, I have the charger plugged in, I have some LED lights plugged in, and then I also have my phone charger plugged into the back there. So obviously with all the tools being battery powered, charging is quite a big consideration. Milwaukee's thought of that already. They make this rapid charger that will charge 3 M18 or 3 M12 batteries. From what I've read or understand, it's a sequential charger. So if you filled up 3 of these, it might only charge 1 or 2, putting full charge towards those batteries before it moves on to the next one. It's kind of a cool feature. So you basically get more full batteries more rapidly than if you had 3 kind of slowly charging. I put some clips on the sides to hold some of the HD12s, and then have some extra batteries back here. And then one of the nice things, I have this drawer that has, you know, a few quick access batteries, some of the clips. These will hold the 12s, but what happens is there's a dust collection hose that's running right here, and it kind of gets hung up on them a little bit. So I keep the 12s down there, and that's why I came up with that solution. One interesting thing I will note about the drawer here. So this charge cable I have running underneath the drawer down. I drilled through the drawer. It's running connected down under the drawer and then runs up over to the power strip on the far side. The cord is just 6 inches too short to be able to fully extend the drawer. And I had an extra flip stop that I purchased. So I actually installed the flip stop back there, and it actually keeps the drawer from opening and hyperextending the cord. I thought that was pretty cool. The Milwaukee radio down here on the bottom, just for fun. I mean, I have music in the garage too, but if you're outside and you kind of want music just around where you're working, it's pretty handy. I think I have 4 HD12s. So the miter saw, table saw, I think I have 5 actually, because 1 came with my circular saw as well. So plenty of batteries to keep running all the time, and then various other smaller M12s and M18s. So I want to talk about the cubbies. You have this one and one on the other side as well. This is just kind of general storage for whatever you need. I generally tend to use it for PPE stuff, so gloves, safety glasses, ear protection, things like that. I also have the clamp that comes with the miter saw that I don't ever use tucked back in. So I'm using a 5-inch caster. Steer end is over there, fixed end is over here. They're inset from the floor locks, so they're directly in line with each other. So the way I have this structured is there are 2x4 rails on the sides, and then I have a 2x10 spanning above that, flush with the top side. So the casters and floor locks are actually set in from the base a bit, and that was mainly to maximize storage and lower the height of the tabletop. The floor locks themselves are a little bit different than my other selection I made for the DeWalt bench. These are kind of a kick release style, and then because they're up, set up a little bit, they're a little skinny to get in there, but I got massive feet and I can still get my foot up on it to lower it down, so still works pretty well. The Wheelbase is fairly narrow. Center to center is 48 inches. Just basically do that for the ability to maneuver easily within the garage space. For me, this is way better than like having the caster locks that go on the end of your bench. When you do that, it's just kind of a little bit more challenging to steer and maneuver.